No one is allowed to die at Disneyland. Did you ever wonder how that's possible? Working at Disneyland is not all it's cracked up to be. There are things the general public is not privy to, although rumors circulate online about certain practices. One of these rumors is true. Nobody is allowed to die at Disneyland. As part of the Anaheim Fire EMT team, we are on site for more serious events. The park's staff, known as cast members, have their own team of trained personnel. They deal with everything from small cuts and scrapes to ride-induced sickness. But every once in a while, somebody needs to take a trip to the hospital. When that happens, two of us will prepare an ambulance and a nurse will be called in to assist. We transport the patient to a nearby hospital and treat them on the way there, within the short amount of time we have. Starting an IV in the back of a moving vehicle can get pretty hairy. Let me tell you, but I've done it on multiple occasions. Potholes can make things really interesting when you have a needle in someone's arm and you're fishing for a vein. The important thing is to make sure you don't hit an artery or poke yourself with the bloody needle, especially if your patient looks like an IV drug user. I've been assigned to the theme park for the past few months, and have come to enjoy working here for the most part, until today. I'll tell you why. As I've said before, nobody is allowed to die at Disneyland. And sometimes fate is not kind enough to comply with corporate policies. This morning, I was called in to assist with an accident near the teacup ride. It was still early and the park was quiet as visitors were just starting to file in. The weather was warm and sunny, a typical Anaheim day. But there was a barrier set up near the entrance to the ride. Several people were being questioned and were complaining loudly about their phones being confiscated. A few were in tears and looked borderline hysterical. These people were being taken behind closed doors by men in suits with Disneyland badges. "It'll be given right back to you. Just a moment," a security guard was saying. And I saw him hit the delete button to get rid of the most recent video on a visitor's cell phone. "Park policy," he said, giving the device back to the woman. "Thanks for your cooperation. Enjoy the rest of your day." Quote. She started to protest, looking at the deleted file, but her husband grabbed her arm and pulled her away, casting a nervous look at the barricade. The woman eventually relented and the two of them walked off. "Right this way," the security guard said, looking at me. He directed me behind the barricade and I saw a very terrified teenager was doing CPR on a decapitated man. With each thrust, blood spurted out from the place where his head should have been. The sounds being made were disturbing, like a wet dog toy being stepped on over and over again. One of the squeaky ones. "What are you doing?" Question mark. "Why?" Question mark. Quote. I tried to get the words out but couldn't. "We need you to take over for the kid. This man needs to be taken to a hospital." I stared at the security guard, dumbstruck. A hospital? This man needed to get to a funeral home for cremation. There would be no open casket for this one. "You must be kidding." The security guard grabbed my arm and pushed me over towards the kid. "Take over," he said. "The kid is tired. You need to do your job." Another security guard joined him and the two of them gave me a stern look which indicated I'd better not argue with them. I tried to explain to them, unsure how they weren't getting it. I tried to tell them CPR was not going to help a dead man with no head. But it was like talking to a brick wall. And pretty soon they made it clear that if I didn't do what I was asked, I would be the one in need of a hospital visit. As completely insane as it was, I got down on my knees and took over, doing CPR on the headless man. Each time I pushed down on his chest, a fountain of partially coagulated blood shot out from the hole at the top of his neck. What happened to him? I asked the kid who I'd taken over for. I recognized him as the one who ran the ride. I don't know, man, he said, shaking and pale. I just looked up and the dude's head was flying. Man, I don't even know where the damn thing ended up. Quote. I pressed down on his sternum again as hard as I could, repeating the same amount of pressure, the same depth, despite the fact that it was all pointless. 100 compressions per minute, 2 inches deep, ensuring proper placement of the hands. It was all so ingrained in me that I did it perfectly, despite the fact that this man would never breathe again. Eventually someone who looked like a manager showed up. He was wearing a sharp-looking suit despite the warm weather and had cold blue eyes with no indication of any compassion. Hey, these guys wanted me to keep doing CPR, I told him, quickly sensing that he was in charge of this clown show. Can I stop now? He's obviously dead. The man in the dark suit shook his head. Keep going. Don't stop. He had a look about him that I didn't like. A cold, angry sort of feeling came off the man. Like a dark aura. I decided not to argue with him. Get Bill from Cryo up here, he told one of the security guards. Tell him to bring the gurney. The man looked around and then whispered under his breath. And someone get that damn head down from the tree before some kid sees it. Asterisk. A strange black vehicle with mouse ears on top and an enclosed flatbed parked in front of us and I was forced inside, then made to continue doing CPR on what was essentially a headless corpse. The man's terrified, gap-mouthed visage stared at me from the other end of the trunk, where one security guard held it on his lap, with his face looking outward. The macabre scene was so surreal and horrifying that I had to keep telling myself I wasn't in a nightmare. This was actually happening. Why are you making me do this? I yelled at the man in the suit, who sat in the front seat. He's dead. Quote. The man just ignored me. As we pulled into a garage marked authorized personnel only and the weird hearse vehicle continued, traveling deeper and deeper into a dark warehouse-like space. Eventually, after a few more minutes of driving deeper and deeper underground, using a series of ramps like you'd find in a parking garage, we came to another steel sliding door. Reaching up to press a button on the ceiling, the man up front looked back at me and locked eyes with me. Almost there, he said. Just a few more minutes. Then he looked at the security guard and furrowed his brow. Jim, what did I tell you about the heads? The security guard's face went red immediately, and he began to dig through a cabinet next to him. It sounded like a drawer full of ice. Then he dropped the head inside. It landed with a loud chunk sound, as if he dropped a six-pack into a cooler on a hot summer day at the lake. He raised his thumb in an affirmative gesture, nodding at the man in the suit. Got it. I was dumbfounded, slowing down my compressions momentarily, and the security guard unclipped the gun from his holster. "Don't slow down," he said. "Keep it going." I got the implied message. But why did they care so much about perfusing the organs of a dead man with oxygenated blood? There was no head, and without a head, the body would be useless. The brain would be dead from lack of oxygen a while ago. And minus that control center, the meat sack I was pressing on with all of my force was essentially obsolete. It was all pointless. Unless memories came back to me of things I had heard in the past. Hadn't Walt Disney insisted on being cryogenically frozen? No, that was insane. Those ideas were insane. But then, as if confirming my worst fears, I saw the writing on the next steel sliding door read, Disneyland Cryogenics Research Facility. CRF authorized cast members only past this point. The next area consisted of massive tanks filled with swirling blue fluid. I saw people suspended in the liquid, their faces frozen like Han Solo in carbonite, their mouths open in silent screams. "It's real," I heard myself whisper silently, then refocused my efforts on CPR. Suddenly it seemed as if there might be a purpose to all of this after all. We pulled into one final, large room. It was filled with equipment that looked decades beyond anything I'd seen before. It reminded me of pictures I'd seen of the Large Hadron Collider, massive, complex mechanical forms that I could never even begin to understand. "Here we are," said the man in the suit, getting out of the front seat. He came around to the back and rolled us out on a gurney with the assistance of a few others. Meanwhile, I just continued doing compressions, too terrified to stop. "It's okay," the man said, with a surprisingly gentle tone now. "You can take a rest now. Thanks for your hard work." Stunned, I got down from the gurney and felt the numbness and pain in my forearms, shoulders, and wrists. I had a lot of practice doing CPR, but that was exhausting even for me. Feeling like I was in a daze, I looked around at the space I was in, taking in my surroundings. "What is this place?" I asked. "Well," the man said, "you're gonna need to sign an NDA so we can let you out of here. I guess I can fill you in." I saw the headless man was being brought up onto a platform, and his head was being carried up there as well. Large machinery hung down from the ceiling, reminding me of Frankenstein's lab, right before he brought the monster to life. A man in a white lab coat was fiddling with items on cloth-covered tables and preparing instruments, like a doctor about to do surgery. You might have heard about how the man himself once wanted to be frozen, kept in cryogenics until the future, so that he could be brought back to life again. You've heard that, right? Most people have. Sure. I mean, I wasn't sure if it was true or not. Well, it is. And he's kept down here in this laboratory. But what most people don't know is that a large portion of the profits this corporation brings in goes towards fulfilling that goal. This equipment down here cost billions of dollars to build and install. And we've finally got everything set up, just the way we need it. I wasn't really sure what to say. The man just continued on. "The thing is, we don't want to try it out on the boss first. What if it doesn't work out? So we've been experimenting with other volunteers. That's why we had people frozen down here. That's why nobody is allowed to die at Disneyland. We need to use every available resource we have. Those bodies you saw on the way in here? Those were people who suffered accidents in the park or who snuck in after hours, at least. They're the ones who nobody would notice missing. Like this guy? Exactly like this guy. Do you know he has no family or extended relations? Robert Biggs. Here is 34 years old. Lives alone. And his only real joy in life is coming to Disneyland. My throat felt tight. My stomach began to drop. And it was like there was a concrete block sitting inside my gut all of a sudden. What are you doing to him? I asked, watching as the man in the lab coat skewered his head atop a shiny, sharp steel rod, as if he were a giant piece of barbecue meat. A shish kebab. The wet, squelching sounds of blood and viscera being pushed aside could be heard as he slid it into place. Bob's head wobbled back and forth slightly, and then was still. We're going to help him, the man said. Just like we've been helping so many others who died in this park. Or should I say, almost died in this park. The world was turning dark around the edges as I tried to focus on staying conscious. I'd never felt so terrified and jarred as I did at that moment. I really felt as if I might pass out from the overwhelming nature of everything that was happening. But I shook it off and told myself to snap out of it. Who knew what these people would do to me if my lights went out? I imagined myself waking up as a victim of their twisted experiments, a man with two different sets of arms. And a second head maybe? I shuddered. Right this way, the man in the suit said, leading me towards a small steel table. For the first time when he spoke I saw something else in his eyes. Something hard and dark. Like a second entity living within his gaze. A second pair of eyes looking back at me from inside. Here's the agreement we'll need you to sign, he said, holding out a pen and pointing at a stack of papers 3 inches thick. Take your time and read through it all. You don't want to sign something you don't understand. His voice was amicable enough. But the look of the contract told me otherwise. Not only was it as thick as a book, it was typed in what appeared to be a 4 or maybe 5-point font, single-spaced and written in complex legalese. The first sentence was 3 pages long. I looked up at the dead man on the platform, and watched in horror as the man in the lab coat attached electrodes to his head and lowered a massive device that looked like a huge laser pointer, directing a beam of energy at his forehead. The dead man began to convulse and shake, his eyes blinking open and close. His arms started moving up and down, his legs pumping as if he were on a stationary bicycle. Holy shit, I muttered, trying to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding up there so that I could read the first sentence of the NDA again. Or try to. It was a brainbuster. The party heretofore referred to as the viewer will be obligated to, on completion of this contract, and without prior understanding of the event heretofore referred to as the disturbance, will. I got to about the same part as before, then blinked my eyes as the words became fuzzy and I lost my place amidst the jumble of tiny letters. It was utterly unreadable. All set? The man in the suit asked, flipping pages until we were at the back of the stack, at a spot marked signature. My eyes drifted up to the platform again, and I saw the dead man was now actually beginning to sit up. He was looking around the room dully, like someone who has just woken from a long sleep. Impossible, I whispered. It's impossible. With a shaky hand I signed the contract, my signature barely legible. Perfect. Now, I think you've deserved to have the rest of the day off, don't you? To reflect. I nodded my head, giving the man his pen back. Jim, show this man out, and get him a ride home. He shouldn't be driving after all he's been through. He patted my shoulder in a condescending way. You've had such a busy day. Go home and get some sleep. I went with the security guard to a waiting vehicle, and the man in the suit called after me. Don't forget about the NDA. You can't tell anyone about this. I turned around, not saying anything. Asterisk. I realized after I got home that I needed to tell people about this. The NDA be damned, I thought, typing this out to share with all of you. It's too important, I told myself. They're stealing corpses and forcing them into undead servitude. That's some evil shit. That's like, end of the world. Zombies taking over. Apocalypse level evil shit. The man in the suit suddenly made me think of a necromancer, some evil sorcerer bent on keeping people alive against their will. I was starting to think that he wasn't a man at all, but something else, as I thought back to the thing I had seen hiding in his gaze. Who knows what endless tasks the dead of Disneyland are being forced into by that dark modern-day wizard? Someone has to do something about it. And maybe this is the first step towards stopping him. Edit 1. I got a weird email right after posting this. It was a highlighted portion of my contract. I'm trying to make it out, but it's something about the consequences of breaking the NDA. Something about forfeiture of life and livelihood. I'm starting to get a little worried. Edit 2. Okay. It's only been a couple minutes, but already I'm getting really freaked out. There's somebody outside my window. They've been moaning and groaning, and they're walking around in my garden, scraping their fingernails against the window glass. I've tried calling the cops, but it doesn't go through. It's like somebody messed with my phone and hacked it, so I can't call the emergency numbers. It just goes through to the Disney Plus sales department. Edit 3. Somebody is trying to get in my front door. There's more than one of them. I can hear them trampling through the garden and scratching at the wood. I need to get out of here. I'm gonna make a run for it. If you don't hear from me again, stay away from Disneyland. And whatever you do, try not to die if you go there. You might wake up as a soldier in the undead army of Walt Disney. Mad. TCC. YT. My mother startles me all the time, and I can't stand it anymore. This all happened years ago, when the front door started rattling around like an old tooth in a rotten gum. My parents had left me alone even though I was far too young, so I told myself it was only the wind and ignored those random thuds and bangs. But while I played Mario Kart in the lounge, those sounds morphed into a furious thump 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 so violent I couldn't help but picture an escaped serial killer trying to break in. I went to go investigate. As I turned into the landing, those noises tapered off, and by the time I reached the door, only the ankle-height flap was rattling around, because Snoopy, my pet cat, was mashing his skull against the clear screen. His magnetic collar released the locking mechanism on contact. Although this trick usually took some trial and error, I let out a sigh of relief as he leapt onto the welcome mat and licked his front paw. The situation had been a nasty combination of nasty weather and a 9-year-old boy's overactive imagination. That's all. With my heart rate already climbing down, I pushed the letterbox open to confirm the coast was clear. At the far edge of the garden, a vague, out-of-place shadow slipped away into the gloom. Quickly I reeled away and launched into full-blown denial mode. Maybe it was a trick of the light? Or the squirrel that dug up Mom's rose bushes? Yeah, that's it. Another quick scan of the outside street confirmed my suspicions. There was nothing to worry about. Big boys didn't get spooked by dumb squirrels. Just then, the kitchen phone screeched, which made me jump up and yelp. The landing branched off in two directions. Left led into the kitchen. Right went through to the lounge. Due to the house's odd layout, you could walk in an infinite loop around the stairs. In the kitchen, I grabbed the cordless phone off the counter. Alex, we're still here with your gran, Dad said. Your mom's speaking with the doctor now. Is everything okay? Quote. My parents had enough problems. No reason to tell them a bit of air spooked me. Besides, if they didn't think I could handle staying home alone, it meant no more unsupervised gaming sessions. Yeah, everything's fine. Are the electrics off? If anybody left so much as a plug switched on overnight, they received an hour-long lecture courtesy of my father. Although he kept the grisly details hidden from me, I knew it had something to do with bad wiring, the previous owner, and an electrical fire. Yep. Good. Listen, we're at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Ward 5B. You got a pen handy? I'll call out the number. After jotting it down on a scrap of paper, I asked him to send Grandma my love. Before the phone even landed in its cradle, those thuds and bangs started up again, quietening the second I peeked into the hall. I shuffled back to the landing and stood on the welcome mat. One quick peek through the letterbox, I knew everything was fine. Then back to Mario Kart. I hesitated for several seconds. Legs shaky. What if a hand reached through and grabbed my throat? Or what if there was a grinning face staring back at me? The idea sent shivers along my spine. No, time to man up. I waved the notions aside, hunched over, sighed, then pushed the letterbox open. A set of eyeballs were right there, inches away from my own. Immediately I reeled away, heart thumping against my chest, and fell against the bottom of the stairs. 8 bony fingers wormed their way inside the house, propping open the letterbox. Through the narrow slot I saw a pair of eyes, one brown, the other a milky blue with no iris or pupil, and screamed so loud I'm surprised the neighbors didn't hear, even though they lived a half-mile down the lane. Gary, let me in, said a raspy voice. In a frantic panic, I scrambled into the kitchen, where I pressed my back flat against the wall and didn't move a single muscle. The room shrinking around me. I forced myself to breathe. Every door and window had been locked. Every curtain pulled shut. Nobody could break into my little fortress. Gary, what's wrong? Shouted the voice. It's time to go see Benny. Whoever it was sounded oddly upbeat. Working up the nerve to shout back took 5 minutes. I'm not Gary. Beyond the dim hall, a grinning face pushed right up against the cat flap, fogged up the plastic with its clammy breaths, obscuring the features. Whoever it was kept calling for someone named Gary. I considered calling the police, but reasoned they'd be more upset over my parents leaving their child home alone than a simple case. Sure enough, from the far end of the hall, I heard them stand up and shuffle off. Then the house went back to sleep. This time, I didn't check the letterbox. The kitchen phone buzzed after 3 more games of Mario Kart. "You not in bed yet?" Dad asked, sternly. I was just about to go. "Listen, your mother and I might be here a while. Everything's okay, isn't it?" "Sure." "Grand. Get to bed, call us if there's any problems." At night, the journey upstairs always freaked me out. Even without intruders outside, you could only turn the downstairs light out from downstairs, which meant flicking off the switch trapped you in swelling darkness. Hidden monsters breathing down your neck while you scrambled for the warm safety of the well-lit first floor. Like always, the gloom closed in on me as I made the mad dash. In my bedroom, I changed into a pair of pajamas and somehow fell asleep. Later, the cat flap jolted me awake. That bipolar critter never knew what it wanted to do, while the minutes ticked away on the Simpsons clock beside my bed. The door jiggled about, and since the porch canopy blotted out the space directly beneath my bedroom, I couldn't get a view of the action. Snoopy needed help, that's all. Just in case, though, I armed myself with a hockey stick before I moved out into the upstairs landing, rounded the banister, and stared down at the bowels of the house, dreading another plunge into the abyss. At that exact moment, the hatch lowered its voice. "Snoopy?" I called out. My foot hovered over that final visible step for several seconds. Then I darted the rest of the way and flicked the switch before the monsters could snatch me. And as the bulb overhead blinked on, my blood ran cold, because now, the cat door lay on top of the welcome mat. The screen and surrounding mechanism had been knocked loose, leaving a gaping wound through which the outside air reached out and nipped at my toes. Maybe Snoopy pried the thing from its housing by ramming his head against it too many times? That cat did have an exceptionally thick skull. Either way, that hole may as well have been an open invitation to any thieves and murderers. Dad needed to hear about this. Still armed with the hockey stick, I snatched the phone off the kitchen counter, but as I held it against my ear, the lounge door shivered open several inches. Wait, was somebody inside the house? Or had my nerves taken over like whenever I ran the upstairs gauntlet? "Snoopy?" I shouted into the darkness, slotting the phone in my pajama pocket. Arms quivering, I shuffled across the room, pushed the door open with the stick, and poked my head inside. Empty. Another open door at the far side of the room brought me into the hall. Then a right turn brought me back to the landing, where my stomach unclenched. All clear. On instinct, I flicked the light switch from the base of the stairs off using the hockey stick, so there'd be less distance to travel. Rushed up the steps, and then realized I'd forgotten the scrap of paper with the hospital's number scribbled on it. Before I could psych myself up to brave the darkened wasteland again, the staircase creaked and groaned. Frozen on the spot, I craned forward to peek over the banister and found myself biting down on a giant scream. Because there, at the foot of the steps, stood the outline of a figure. Its head whipped up in my direction, which made the phone slip out of my grasp and tumble out of view. It ricocheted off the steps out of sight as the horrible shape advanced. Once it reached the halfway point, the bulb illuminated a floating face. Lopsided, wrinkled features. Thin lips twitched over in a wide grin revealing yellow molars. Then the figure took another step. and I could see it was a lady. She looked straight at me and affectionately said, "Gary." She wore a large trench coat, so long it touched her ankles, and had a stained satchel slung over her shoulder. Glass bottles clinked together each time she climbed another step. "I'm not Gary," I stammered, backstepping toward my room. The lady rose into view and craned her neck sideways, her head at my ankle level between the little wooden bars. I think you have the wrong house," I rasped. Part of me believed whoever it was would soon realize this was all a big mistake and leave. After rounding the stairs and stepping onto the landing, her arms went up as though anticipating a hug. "Come to mommy." I slammed the door shut and held my body against it, my breaths shallow and quick, but the intruder swatted me aside and stepped through. I planted my feet and swung the hockey stick in a fierce arc. It hit the lady's right temple so hard vibrations traveled along my forearms. But her smirk didn't even falter. I stepped away, trembling. In the light of the bedroom, I got my first proper look at the trespasser. She was tall, taller than my dad even, and painfully thin. A network of red veins stood out along one half of her face. Deep wrinkles furrowed the other. As she lunged at me, the momentum knocked me down and stripped my breath away as her body pinned mine against the carpeted floor. Withered hands engulfed my face and hooked the sides of my mouth. Long digits, capped with fingernails sharper than ice picks, pulled and squeezed my cheeks the way you would a baby. I pummeled her jaw again and again, but the blows had zero impact. I whipped from side to side and twisted like an eel, but she held on tighter than a python. For an old lady, she had one hell of a grip. Exhausted from all the screaming, I was powerless to stop her as she scooped me up, cradled my head tight against her chest, rocked us back and forth, and said, "It's okay, Gary. Mommy's home. Mommy's home." I kept trying to explain my name was actually Alex. I don't know how many times I said this. Stringy drool thicker than Vaseline dribbled over my face as she kissed along my cheek. Again and again. Then she wrangled me over onto the bed before feeling her way along the outside of the room. Stooped low, until she came to a loose portion of skirting board and shivered it off the wall. There was a gap, but how the hell did she know about it? I'd slept in that room for 5 years and hadn't noticed. The thought of making a daring escape occurred to me, but the idea of getting within range of those pale bird claws again set my jaw chattering. She pulled a little tin box out of the hole and carried it towards me. Inside lay several children's drawings. Her mismatched eyes glistened as she flicked through the sheets. "You were always such a talented artist," she said, in the warm tones you'd expect from a proud grandparent. My entire body quivered as the drawings passed from her hands to mine. The first one showed 3 figures. A mother, a boy, roughly my age with the same dark hair, and a second, shorter boy. The names above them said Mommy, Gary, and Benny. Back in the middle of the space, she pulled a vodka bottle out of her satchel, but rather than take a swig, she doused the carpeted floor with a clear liquid, dabbing the wardrobe, a chest of drawers, and my work desk as she passed them by. The blue walls turned a shade darker from where she'd splashed them. After completing a full lap of the space, she held the bottle above her head and let the remainder of the contents spill over her like rainwater. Then she tossed the bottle aside and pulled a little box of matches from her coat pocket. "Time to see Benny," she said cheerfully. Eyes locked on mine. Then, without the slightest hesitation, she struck the match and tossed it onto the floor. Flames raced around the room. They stretched out across the carpet, up the walls, over the bookshelf, spreading in every direction. They even extended over the bed, high enough to lick the soles of my bare feet. This caused me to stand against the wall, bouncing from one side to the other, desperate to avoid getting burned. Breathing became more and more difficult as the fire surged and swelled. It engulfed the desk where I did my homework. My Action Man figures practically cried out as they liquefied. Outside the room, a smoke detector wailed, "This horrible worse than nails against a chalkboard." The sour stench of burning flesh and singed hair melted into the air. And while the raging inferno built up and up, the lady spun in circles, proud of her handiwork, ignorant of the fact she was burning like a Salem witch. Hell, if anything, it looked like she was enjoying herself. I was about to get embalmed inside my own bedroom. I needed to escape. But even without the lady throwing up an obstacle, the floor was an absolute death trap. I'd never make it across. My eyes whipped around, finally landing on the window. Dad always said climbing out one was a good way to break your neck. But what other choice did I have? I bounced up, twisted the handle, and hesitated as I looked down. Darkness blotted out the canopy beneath the sill. I knew it was there but hesitated nonetheless. "Gary, no," the pyromaniac said. And as she did, her breath ignited like some sort of Vegas stage show. She lunged forward, arms outstretched, eager for one last hug. That's how the firemen would find our remains, I thought. Two interlinked skeletons. Maybe they'd think she died shielding me from the blaze? "Come back," she said. "Let's be a family again. Talk about your motivational speeches." When I got my body half outside, she threw herself across the bed and snatched my left ankle. Her palm had the consistency of jelly. The flesh came away in wet globs. One little hop, and then the world gave way. My feet hit the angled surface of the canopy, sending me skidding sideways. After a split second of weightlessness, my back hit the top of a bin and make me spin right around. Then I crashed into Mom's rose bushes. Hard. Still aflame, I tore off my pajamas and rolled around in the dirt, my hands and feet already blistering. I'd made it out in one piece, though. I looked up at my bedroom, where the intruder swiped the air and said, "Gary, no. Come back. Come back, KKKK." Her cries degenerated into a twisted scream of agony as the flesh dripped off her bones like candle wax. At top speed, I flew toward the neighbor's house where I mashed their doorbell. They got the shock of their lives at the sight of a 9-year-old covered in sweat and soil, standing on the porch. Without pausing for a single breath, I explained the situation. Then they rushed me to hospital, the same one my parents were in. The fire brigade arrived in time to save the house, although the repair costs set my parents back a fair bit, even with the insurance money. But there was another nasty surprise to come, because after the coroners identified the old lady by her dental records, they determined how she knew about that hidden compartment. She was the previous owner of the house. I found a zipper on the back of my neck. I found a zipper on the back of my neck. I found it by accident. I was putting my hair up, something I did almost every day. My hand brushed against something at the bottom of my hairline. It could have been a large skin tag. I finished tying my hair up and grabbed my phone. so I could see the thing better. When I saw it, I wasn't sure what it was. It was too big for a skin tag, but not the shape of a tick or something foreign. I realized as I stared at it that it was the top of a zipper. It was darker than my skin tone. It was more like a rosy gray. I nervously reached behind me to touch it. It was smooth, as if made of metal. But it wasn't metal. It was skin, just not my skin. I was able to flip the zipper top up and down. It didn't hurt, but I expected it to. How long had it been there? I didn't notice it before. A rational person would have called a doctor. Called someone. At least, but I was compelled to open it. I pulled the zipper down just a little bit. It still didn't hurt. As I pulled, zipper teeth emerged. No blood came out, but my skin began to peel apart. I knew I should stop. My fingers trembled as I pulled a bit more. The skin easily separated. The top was 2 inches below my hairline when I heard my husband wake up. I ran to the door and slammed it shut. I locked it, my breath coming quick. I didn't want him to see what I was doing. I knew, on some visceral but invisible level, that it was wrong. The zipper scared me. What was underneath the zipper scared me more. I heard him lumbering towards the bathroom. He turned the knob. "Leah, let me in. I have to pee." "I'm in here," I called, my voice shaking and off. "Can I just pee real quick?" He was barely awake. "No, go downstairs." He paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." I didn't mean to yell, but there it was. The silence that followed was heavy with hurt. He waited for a moment, maybe hoping for an apology or some sort of explanation. I gave him neither. Eventually his footsteps sounded down the hall. I felt relief and fear in equal measures. After a few breaths I returned to the mirror, my phone in my hand. When I was able to see the zipper again, a thick black liquid had begun dripping from the opening. It was too dark to be blood. I touched it. It was warm. The substance was sticky, stretching between my fingers. I brought my hand to my face, examining it closer. In the blood were small specks of golden light. There were little cosmos within the ooze. Max pounded on the door. "Why aren't you answering me?" My eyes left my hand and went to the door. How long had I been standing there? "Stop ignoring me." "I'm not," I whispered. "What are you doing in there?" "Nothing," I whispered. I heard his body slump against the door. He was crying again. "How long are you going to punish me?" Quote. I wasn't punishing him. This wasn't about him. Why does he always think everything is about him? I was at the mirror again, pulling the zipper further down. The black liquid was mostly contained within the zipper, but droplets made their way down my back. Something large was pushing against my spine. I could see it, like a fetus's fist against a mother's stomach. It pressed outward, making my neck and back look bumpy. There was something in there. Something that needed to come out. I pulled the zipper until it was down to my shoulders. I began to hear gurgling coming from the opening. For a moment I thought spiders were pouring from the teeth, but I blinked and they were gone. I had never felt so scared and yet so compelled. Obsessed. My hand shook so much I couldn't hold the zipper to pull it. A slick hand shot out of the opening, covered in the black substance. I screamed. The hand flicked off the substance, almost nonchalantly, and grasped the zipper. Max's voice penetrated the scene. "What is going on? Are you hurt?" I fell to my knees as the foreign hand pulled the zipper further. It was at my shoulder blades, then the middle of my back, and then the lower back. My skin was peeled forward like a cocoon. The hand withdrew inside me. After a few moments, a leg revealed itself, stretching out of my body like a dancer. Then another leg, bent backward, feet now on the floor. A figure completely emerged. It straightened itself. Long hair stuck to its body. I crawled away from it, terrified. My skin was still open and gushing the black substance onto the floor. I could still see Cosmos in the ichor. The figure turned towards me. It was a woman, naked, bathed in black. She bent forward and smiled at me. "One more thing," she said in a voice I recognized. She reached over me, shoving her hand into the opening on my back. For the first time I felt pain. Her hand inside me felt like a hot knife. I tried to hold in my screams but didn't succeed. She rooted around for what felt like a lifetime. Finally, when I felt close to passing out, she removed her hand. In it was an axe. The axe was too large to have fit inside me. She slung it over her shoulder, still smiling. I heard my own breath, panting. I also heard the faint voice of Max. From outside the door, he was begging, crying. He was knocking, pounding. The figure noticed too, her face turning towards the door. "Don't," I whispered. I knew what she wanted to do. I knew, because it was what I wanted. She set the axe down and turned to the mirror. Putting her hair up, she wiped the substance off her face. Without looking at me, she said, "Wait here. I'll take care of it." I gathered my knees to my chest, sobbing into them. She grabbed the axe. Unceremoniously, she unlocked the door and opened it. Max's voice was small as he said, "Leah?" She closed the door behind her.